shall commence Thursday, March 14th at 2019 at 2 p.m. Please stand for our prayer and pledge. As we bow our heads to pray, may each of us thank our Creator for the privilege of living in and serving our community. We ask for wisdom and guidance in any and all decisions. We also ask for the protection of the members of our armed forces, pray for their safe return, and give strength to their loved ones. These we ask in thy name. Amen.
Amen.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll do a roll call.
Coming.
Okay.
Council Chair, Mayor Patrick T. Riley.
Here.
Vice Chair Steve Rivet.
Here.
Council members Grant Ball.
Here.
Brian Vale.
Here.
Dick Horn.
Here.
Danny White.
Here.
P&Z Chair Wayne Hebert.
Here.
P&Z members Doug Dial.
Here.
Mary Hoffmeister.
Here.
Did I miss anybody?
You didn't sound sure of yourself there.
Then I have the town planner Todd Mowry. The town administrator Matt Stinnett.
Here.
The P&Z secretary Deneen Shearer. Here. And I'm the town clerk treasurer Debbie Franklin.
Okay, thank you. So I'll turn workshop over to Todd, who's going to give us a presentation.
Hey, good afternoon. I mean, come on, you have sweets. I don't think it was coffee though. I think some people were asking for coffee already. So today what we want to do is we want to kind of help you as we think about some things for the town and talk about what we're going to call a zoning overlay. And so for the packet, I have some copies, and hopefully everybody has a copy of that. So we have not only a zoning map, but we have our presentation that we want to sort of walk through. How many have heard about a zoning overlay before? Have you heard about the concept of zoning overlays? It's basically, let's talk about some of the basics here. We have typical zoning. Typical zoning, or traditional zoning as we'll call it, has traditional zoning districts. You have commercial districts, you have residential districts, you have industrial districts, you have open space areas, you have your traditional districts. When zoning was first established, these were the districts. They're still continuing to be used today. They have never lost their appeal, and they have worked out extremely well. Overlay districts are what we would call, if you have a tool bag, you have a toolbox, you want to know that you have different types of tools in that tool bag or the toolbox to be able to utilize in your community. An overlay zoning is a type of zoning district, but it's another concept that gets us to an ability to be able to have some flexibility. You're familiar with planned unit developments, PUDs? The idea of a PUD says, listen, there are times where maybe traditional zoning doesn't really work for us, and as a result, we may need to use a PUD. Why do we need to use a PUD? Because we need a win-win situation. Somebody may come along and say, you know what, I have this amazing concept. I want to take this old historic structure, I want to renovate it, I want to do some neat things with it, but you know what, I don't conform to setbacks. We don't meet your setbacks at all. I don't think I can put the amount of parking in that you require. My building's higher than maybe what you're allowing. There's some things, but I really want to take this old historic barn or this structure and I want to convert it and make it into something useful. You're like, well, you know what? Tell you what, PUD. We'll put you in a PUD. As a result of that PUD concept, you gain the win of not having to put in as many parking spaces. You don't have to worry about setbacks that you want or whatever it is. What does the town gain? We get to keep a historic structure, we get to have the look that we want, we get to have certain things, so it becomes a win-win situation. So a PUD is a common tool that people want to use. But what does a PUD require? It requires that you go through and rezone a piece of property from its traditional zoning to this PUD concept. And that PUD concept has to be in line with your comprehensive plan as well. So that's another tool that can be in your tool bag, is the PUD. And as we go through this, if you have questions and comments, as long as they don't take us into rabbit trails, I want to be able to address those as well. But I think you'll begin to see some things as we go through this. So if we can, I'll kind of go through this overlay concept, and then once we finish, then if you have some questions, we'll run into those elements and begin to talk about it. Does that work? Possibly, maybe. Come on. I think we're gonna have to bring the dancing clown selling popcorn next time. Bring them in. All right, let's talk about this. So, for this presentation, what we want to do is just the basics here. Tool description. What is it? You see, I mentioned it is part of your toolbox. It's just something that allows you to basically take an area, a piece of land, and if you can sort of think about it like this table here. This table could be one zoning district, or it could be multiple zoning districts. What am I saying? This could be commercial, this could be residential, this could be industrial. Your overlay is going to be a concept that takes, we'll use this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It's not going to take your entire town, but it's going to come in and it's going to overlay on top of the existing zoning. Keeps all the underlying zoning in place. So whatever was permitted, whatever was prohibited, that remains the same. But the overlay comes in and says, you know what? There are some things that we may want for a particular area, a particular part of our community. And as a result, we may have a common goal. And as a result of that, we're going to put this overlay on top, and that is going to begin to do things. It could be the comments now are potential uses. You want to create a walkable community, you want to have certain pathways. So we're going to put a pedestrian overlay in place. Maybe you want to preserve and enhance a special district. You're in a special part of the historic area. Like we're going to put this overlay on. So that way, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential, industrial, we're going to put this concept in that says, you know what, we want to make everybody with a certain type of a roof, or we want to try and do things similar that you already have your town palette where you're trying to do and promote some things there. Maybe you want to encourage economic development. There's a part of your community, you're like, you know what, we need some stimulus, we need to encourage some things. But in order to make it happen, we want tourism and we want economic development to occur. How do we get that to happen? We're going to put an overlay in place that says we want to create picket fences, we want to create split rail fences, we want to begin to create all buildings with projecting signs versus the flat signs just for this particular area. It can be really small in terms of the ideas in an overlay, or it can be really large in terms of the concepts in an overlay. Maybe you want to preserve or enhance the character. You want to protect the water's edge. Maybe you're trying to do some things with stormwater. As you go down the list, you're trying to look at the natural environment, or you're looking at perhaps some ranch lands or some wetlands, and there's some things that you're trying to do in this concept. You can see the common uses on your sheet. I'm not going to read through those. You can easily read that. But again, these are the concepts that we've begun to discuss, such as natural resource protection, or you're trying to do some development guidance where you want to try and get a certain thing going. So here is a little bit of the graphic that shows you. You have all of your underlying zoning that's already in place. Here's an overlay that would come up over the top of that entire area. It can be a small one-block area. It can be a one-lot area. It could be miles in size. It doesn't really matter. So this was one where they did a wellhead protection project for the community. If you're familiar with wellhead protection, anytime you have a water source, you want to protect that area and the integrity of it. So they said we want to create a wellhead protection overlay. So you can do what you want in that area, but if you're drilling, if you're perhaps doing something that could have a contaminant, you're going to have a service center, anything that may be dealing with something that could affect the water in that area where we're drawing from, we're going to create a wellhead protection area. So they use it as that concept, but it is all within a zoning toolbox. So let's look at the next page. If you go to the next page here, we're talking about some of the implementation elements. How is it implemented? It's pretty easy. We, as a group, as a community, we go through and we define the district. So we're going to, again, look at your community, and in a minute we're going to do this with a map. And as we look at the community, we're going to say, what is an area of the community that we think we could use this tool, this zoning overlay concept? And if we begin to apply it to our community, what would we want to do in terms of defining that area? Maybe there's the northern portion of the community that you think we want to try and say, you know what? We're Malabarians. As a result, when people come in, we want them to know that. We want them to feel like there's a sense of place, a sense of pride, a sense of whatever it is that you feel you want to do. Maybe there's some place, when you look at some of the major streets, Malabar, that you're trying to work on. We want to identify that corridor, and so we want to keep the underlying zoning, but we want to do something different related to signage, related to the number of traffic or curb cuts that we're going to allow, or whatever that may be. You're going to begin to say, these are things that we want to do to protect it. So we have to define an area. Let's pick that area. And today, as we talk about things, I would say we wouldn't want to go in and create 15 zones right off the bat. I'd say let's start with 1, maybe 2. Areas. How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. Let's take a small portion, take a piece. Did we like it? Did we have problems with it? Did it need to be tweaked? Should we do something different? Do we need to change our ordinance? But we want to then make the ordinance flexible so that way whatever we've done, it's not constraining us to such a point that, well, that was pointless. There wasn't any point in us even doing that. Second thing, identify the areas that make up the district. So we define the purpose, we define the area, we've come up with our concept for that, and then as you go down, we're going to then develop some of the rules that would apply to it. And there again, some of the rules may be, we're only going to allow you to have curb cuts every 200 feet, or maybe we're going to say, we don't want people in this area to, have septic systems in that area because you're too close to the water. Maybe it's going to be more of an environmental concern that you have. Whatever it is, you would go through this concept in looking at that. So those are things that you would try and do. It's critical, though, that as we go through this, you need to have buy-in. You want to have buy-in from your community, you want to have buy-in from the planning and zoning, you want to have buy-in from the council. Collectively, you all are going to be enforcing and making this happen, because as a group, if you have the success with that, it should be establishing whatever that purpose was that we originally defined. Now, what I've done for you is in your packet, I've given you the next sheet, which I kind of call the report card. And this is one where sometimes people say, well, what's the point of doing something if I don't know what it's going to cost or what the effects would be? How is this tool compared to any other zoning tool that we could ever use? And so you'll see there's a little bit of a zoning report card. And if we were to look at zoning overlays, first off is the cost. What is the cost of this? This really has no new cost. I've already, been, picked up on your town planner, and from that standpoint, there's nothing that's changing in terms of my roles or duties. And it's the same for any other zoning district. This doesn't require us to go and hire new staff or to hire a transportation engineer, to go and hire some, abstract person to come in, unless it is a specific area, such as maybe we had an environmental corridor and we're concerned about something that would require us to have somebody that would be, an environmental specialist that would come in and do wetland determinations, or somebody that's going to be looking at the number of gopher tortoises in an area, or they're looking at scrub jays, or whatever it is. That may require some additional effort there. The public acceptance, if we look at it, it's not some really wild, crazy, abstract idea. This is something that's been used for many, many decades in communities across the U.S. So this isn't something that we're proposing some new concept. It really hasn't been tried, tested anywhere else. We know it's going to work. We know it's been tested, and we know that from a public standpoint, it works. However, like in anything, if you don't make it simple enough, what's going to happen? People won't understand it. They won't understand what is it you're trying to do. I thought I had a commercial zoning district. You do. We're just adding an umbrella over the top to protect you from the rain. We're giving you some extra flexibility. We're helping you with some concepts, and so that's what happens, yes.
So essentially the original zoning applies, we just put the overlay as additional restrictions?
It could be restrictions, or it could be a help. So it could be an allowance. So you may say, we're only allowing 35 feet in Malabar because you're concerned. We don't want to look like what's going on, as you go towards Melbourne and Palm Bay. So as you start to see their heights along the water, you say, we don't want it. We're going to keep it down. However, you may say, if you create a historic looking structure, if you create a turret, if you create some things, maybe we'll allow you, with the fire chief's participation, understanding of his apparatus and equipment, we may allow you to go to 43 feet in that area. So it's an enhancement, but if you do it, you're also then saying, hey, we're only allowing it if you have given us something that we want. It has to be that win-win concept.
You said this has been implemented somewhere?
Oh.
Who's doing that?
I would say almost every larger community.
Name.
Well, here's a great thing. So let me go to the next. So when the next page, after I finish this report card. So your political willingness to implement the tool, you're going to see it's going to depend upon the provisions within the ordinance. You have to realize, you all, as a council, based upon the recommendation from your planning and zoning board, you're going to say, do we want this? And if so, the political body has to be willing to adopt this. So normally, it's about a B on that standpoint, because it's something new, it's changed, it's something different. And then, we get into the fairness. Again, it's generally looked at as being fairly equitable. It's not something that's, a problem. Administration, Matt's already, he's a dreamboat. Look at this guy over here. This is a piece of cake for him, so this is an A for him. But it's really something that doesn't require a lot of writing. It doesn't require a massive big section. It doesn't require pages and pages of anything. It can be as small as a paragraph to as much as 2 pages in a zoning ordinance. And then, you know, again, it's often represented in either a small scale, it could even be a regional tool. So you'll see some areas. So Mayor, to your point, I just went right next door to take something again that was local. That way you could easily pull it up and you could begin to look. They have 3 different overlays being used in West Melbourne alone. They have the town center overlay, they have a mixed use overlay, and they have the interchange commercial overlay. All 3 are area zoning overlays that they put in place. So they found the success with one, their interchange commercial overlay. They wanted to really do some things there. And you'll find, as you look at your actual sheet, and I'm going to skip down here towards the bottom, these are the very things that they put into theirs as some of the basic items that they were covered and concerned about. Well, where was my little, you get my little laser so if you can see on this. They defined the purpose, they defined an area, they kept their underlying zoning, and then from the, and so when you look at just one of their districts alone, going with what they did on their interstate, they did a 1 mile radius. So rather than sort of defining a specific property, they actually just did a 1 mile radius. They did a 1 mile radius on that. They did their community commercial parkway, their low density commercial, and their general commercial. So they have 3 different zoning districts that were underlying, and then they put that on top of that. And then from that, they said, here are the permitted uses, here are the prohibited uses underneath those existing ones. And then from that, we're going to come along and add some design requirements. We're going to talk about some signage, some landscape improvements, and some parking modifications that we would allow. So these were sort of the 4 things that came in aside from that. They did add, depending upon the overlay, they added a couple of additional permitted uses, some additional things that they were going to allow that weren't already allowed in that existing zoning district. They also said there were some prohibited uses. Those will remain, but we're also going to add 2 or 3 more prohibited uses to that list. So you can see again where this tool that comes in, it doesn't always have to keep everything that is underlying if you decide to implement and add. So you can add, you can subtract to whatever you want. And then here, they said, let's also add some aesthetic things. People coming off the interstate, we want to try and do things, capture them off 95. Yes?
Can you add and subtract as time goes on?
You can. So this is the thing, and Matt and I, we had a staff discussion yesterday. What's important about this, and this is the idea of the KISS principle, keeping it simple. You may want to start off with some simple basics initially. The caution is, let's say you go in and say, we are going to go in and we're going to allow, you know, a smorgasbord of opportunities. We're going to add 15 different uses that aren't even allowed today in that area. Then all of a sudden you come back and you go, whoa, we're getting things we didn't really like. Whoa, we don't like this. I don't like that. So then what happens? You start pulling and retracting all that back in. But what happens? He heard what was going on and he just went and bought 3 different lots because he's like, my goodness, this is an amazing opportunity. And the people that own the lots, they spend a lot more money, or they raise the price of that because they now know they can do some things that they couldn't previously. So the price went up. So guess what happens when you go decide to pull back on those because, wow, you feel like things are out of control? What's he going to do? You're going to say, guys, I'm filing a lawsuit against you. Why? Because I bought the land on the premise I could do this, and you did a taking, which that's the legal terminology, you did a legal taking of my land. You say, no, I didn't. You can still use it for things. Yes, but realize I bought it at a value that was based upon this premise. So you have to be cautious about what you change. Can you change things? Yes. Can you add things? Can you subtract? You can. But you just have to be careful to think about if you're doing it, is it going to affect somebody to the point that they would be able to have a legal challenge that would be upheld in court?
Yeah, so what we could do is just allow very specific things and add to that list, huh?
You could add to the list. If you subtract, it would be something you just really need to be cautious on. Let me grab it.
You know, this town spent years updating the comprehensive land use plan.
Yeah.
And it's at the state level, and they kind of winked, it's okay, they're doing some tweaks, I understand. And now all of a sudden, you know, it seems like this is a little too much, too late. Now we want to modify a plan that we spent years developing, to what end? Are we trying to attract development? Are we trying to discourage development? Are we trying to protect some rare species? I mean, where are we going?
This is a great concept. So what it is this is taking your existing land use plan. This is taking the goals and objectives of your council and saying, listen, if they're pro-economic development, if they're pro-jobs, but you know what? We just know what happened recently with Pays Electric. We all watched what happened and how that went through. And as a result of that concern, were they wrong in their approach with what they asked for? Maybe had there been an overlay in place that said, listen, we're not going to allow you to have buildings larger than, pick a size, 6,000 square feet. We want to have all buildings having not only, the Malabar theme with it, look, but we're looking for only, things that don't have any more than, 20 trucks a day generation, or whatever it is. You could have had a concept in place along Malabar Road that does it. It doesn't affect what happened at the state. You're not going through and changing your comprehensive plan that was
If we
before the state.
developed an overlay, that wouldn't have to go to the state.
It doesn't have to go at all. This is just something you're doing to your zoning ordinance. We're not changing your comp plan. All we're doing is putting another tool in the toolbox for your zoning resources. So the state doesn't care. In fact, the state, they love these concepts because this has, again, become a very widely used tool. It's probably one of the more, you start off with traditional zoning. This was probably one of the next things that ever came along was the concept of overlays. They've been around for at least 40, almost 50 years.
All right, was West Melbourne trying to fix a sin against nature, or were they trying to encourage development?
There again, what's nice is if we pull up their ordinance, it shows the purpose under each one of those. So you'll see the purpose under each district
You gonna
is
share that
different.
with me?
What's that?
You gonna share that with me?
Oh, we can actually pull it up
I
online.
mean,
Yeah, would you like to see?
why did cities do this? Let's stay at the 50,000 foot.
Sure, sure, yeah.
Don't get into the minutia.
Yep.
What motivates cities to do this? To encourage development?
No, because again, if you look at the list again, if we go back to the top, this is what you'll see. And in fact, the first example I gave you was wellhead protection.
The wellhead, I understand that.
Yep, so some are going to do because they decided, you know what? We believe, what was in place doesn't really help allow for our residents to travel from a safe way. So we want to start having an overlay that deals just with sidewalks. And we want to begin to see sidewalks for all these developments. So we're not changing the zoning.
Okay.
So we're creating an overlay that's just going to deal with sidewalks in a particular area. Maybe we're going to have an area that says, you know what? You may want to do that. Let's go to the North End, for example. North End, we know that there are utilities available from, the city next door. But we may say, because we're concerned about the lagoon and things going on, we don't want to have any more new development with septic systems. So if you want development, you're going to have to find a way to connect to sewer for those areas. So you could have something that deals with that. Maybe you want to begin to say, we have so many wetlands now within our city, or the town has so many wetlands, we want to begin to preserve and promote those in a certain way. So maybe from an eco-tourism standpoint, you're going to create an overlay that says, let's begin to do this so we can have people utilizing from a horseback riding standpoint, these areas, so it's a concept. So it all depends upon what you want. That's the nice thing about a tool bed. You have different things. I'll grab you and then come back here.
Seems like this is getting really close and hammering on the door of spot zoning.
This is what's so nice about it. It's not spot zoning at all because your existing zoning is already there. All your existing zoning remains. It doesn't even begin to infringe upon spot zoning. But what it does allow you, again, depending upon what you want, is to fall in line with a community's goals and objectives. It requires you to go through a legal process that has to be legally defensible. And the nice thing about it is that because you're keeping your underlying zoning, here's the concept. You're not coming in to saying, this is zone residential, we're going to put an overlay in it, and everybody has to have a nuclear power plant. That doesn't promote good public policy. It's not within the public general safety, health, and welfare of a community. From a spot zoning standpoint, people love to say, this is spot zoning, spot zoning. Most people don't really understand how spot zoning really works. Even in the Pays Electric concept. If I have a piece of property and there's a, Malabar Road and across the street, it's zoned, ag, and I want to change that from commercial, and I want this to be commercial, is that spot zoning? No. Even though there's a significant roadway separating the two, I can cross over that and go to that. There could be a canal, there could be a water tributary. Now I can't really go across to the island and say, there's connectivity. That's not considered connectivity. But even from a spot zoning standpoint, if you look at that whole concept as a whole, people often misconfuse things. Overlays, you're not really coming in and saying you were allowed only residential and now you can do full-blown commercial. We're not really getting into that boat. but you could allow limited aspects for an area if it is in line with where you think you are already said the master plan is going. If the master plan said, you know what, we want to begin to see things from a tourism standpoint and be encouraged in this area, and we want the Malabar vernacular, as you call it, the vernacular, the look, that appearance to begin to take place. This guy with his residential home that's been in his house for 60 years, he's not changing that. Why is he ever going to change it? However, you may allow a little shop to go in that area, even though it may be his own residential. You may allow it if you did an overlay, if they were guaranteeing you to do the Malabar vernacular, and they were only going to have, you know, no more than 7 parking spaces. So it could never become a full-blown, full-fledged retail establishment that you could normally get in a general commercial zoning district. So that way it couldn't become another motorsports. But if it wanted to be some little boutique place that only had 3 parking spaces, whatever you want, you can define all that in your overlay.
I have some information from the town of Sebastian. It sounds like they did that along their riverfront.
They did.
Okay, and what it showed me was they allowed residential and commercial, but they had specific rules for each. If it were residential, your setback was this, your side, everything, your parking. And if you were commercial, your setback was a little different. Parking was different. Impermeable area,
Yes.
different. Is that an overlay?
It is an overlay.
Okay.
And so that's the nice thing about it, is that when you put an overlay in place, it may cover commercial, residential, industrial. They may be the underlying zoning districts. So when you put the overlay on top of that, you may say, you know what? We have some residential areas. So if the overlay applies, sorry. If the overlay applies and you're in a residential area, we're going to be concerned about those residential properties. So you're going to set a couple of standards in place for that. If it's commercial, we're going to have these standards. But generally speaking, there is that purpose. And in any time we draft an ordinance, we always start off with what you call either the intent or the purpose. That's the first blurb in your zoning ordinance under every single district. This is the intent. That's your legally defensible ground for that. Then you begin to set all your specifics underneath that define all those various things. Yes?
So, what specifically ignited this whole discussion on overlay? Was it because of the Pease Electric situation?
So that's a
Or
great...
is someone else, or is there a main corridor where they want to start this?
So there isn't a main corridor that needs to, this needs to take place. What has happened is because of the Pease Electric and beginning to look at these concepts and things that are going on, I'm hearing some respects where people saying, hey, we want to be a small town, we want to keep that charm, we want to keep the vernacular, we want to keep that look, we don't want to become, you know, Melbourne or Palm Bay or West Melbourne, we want to be Malabar. And as a result, let's do that. There are others that are saying, can we also promote tourism? Is there a way for us to try and get some tourism in here? And is there a way to try and promote jobs without us losing, again, the flavor? And so as I began to look at your ordinance and looking at what was going on even with Pease Electric, I began to realize there are some missing tools in your toolbox, and this would be one of them. I've had 2 or 3 other proposals that have been mentioned to me about perhaps some other types of developments. And one was the Yellow Dog Restaurant. They were asking, and right off the bat, they could do the exact same thing as Pease Electric. They could come along and they could go through and they could try and work and see if they could get a rezoning and go through that whole process. They may have success, they may not have success. And I begin to look at that and say, okay, if you have an area like that, if you did that, are you beginning to allow a trend that you may not be able to ever stop? So
will this work for Yellow Dog as far as an overlay is concerned?
It would. And so why don't I go to a map here, if I can, just for a second. We'll take a pause on this. And so that is pulled up for you. So, you know, again, if we look at the town of Malabar and begin to come in, let me just take you up to the north end. I just did this right now just as an example to be able to talk about this for demonstration purposes. If you look at the north of the town, I drew a little line in showing where the town boundaries are, roughly speaking. And as we begin to look at this area, you can begin to see what we would feel is the entrance to the town. And as you begin to look at this area, you have the restaurant. And as you come down, you can see what they've been utilizing as a ground space. But then some of these other areas here, are these suitable to ever have businesses along this area? Or should this remain as coastal preserve? You all show it as coastal preserve. And that may be a solid thing to do. As we come closer down towards Malabar Road in the intersection here, it's really narrow at this point. Somebody though may say, you know what, we may want to put an overlay in place here that does something to create a certain aesthetic appeal, or that you want just ground-mounted signs in this area, or maybe you want maybe you'd like to see flashing signs in this area, or maybe you'd like to see, you know, everybody have green roofs versus purple roofs. Whatever it is, you could do, you know, those types of things. As we head down closer towards Camelot and come down by Camelot, through this area, obviously, they have some things. And what's the name of the nautical club?
Malabar Mariners?
Yeah, the Mariners. You know, so they have their little piece here. So we have different things in place. As you come closer down by Rocky Point, again, we come into a whole other situation, you know, with Rocky Point and all the residents here along Rocky Point, and you know what their expectations may be. So I think as a whole, we just want to think about your community and whether or not there's some things in place. Let me bring you out back over the town this week. Is everybody familiar with where we're looking, by the way? This is US 1, this is north, and as we head south, coming down south, you can begin to get a feel. And then until you hit the point here where Rocky Point is and come around. So in overlay, you could create an overlay for Rocky Point. You could create an overlay for this area. Whatever the case may be, you all have already established some significant areas that as a town that they say, listen, we'd like to encourage development, we'd like to encourage redevelopment, we'd like to encourage job generation in these areas. How do you encourage that? In some ways, an overlay can be a tool. So let's use the example of Yellow Dog. What could happen in a concept like that? Let me make it so we can look at this a little easier. In this particular concept, you could do something that could be sort of defined as, you know, the North River overlay. The North River overlay could be on the east side of US 1. It could be on the west side of US 1. It could pick up a certain distance in. It could, you know, extend, you know, as far south as you want on that area. It could remain on the coastal preserve, so it's covering several different zoning districts. And the stated goals for that area could be something that would encourage a feeling of an entrance, some type of a feel that you now know you've hit the town of Malabar. Again, we want everything along here to have split rail fences. We would like everything along here to have buildings up front and have parking behind. You know, we'd like whatever it is you think you would want to have for that area. If it were something for the Yellow Dog, in their particular case, you could do a zoning overlay that would say, listen, we'll allow everything that's underlying here, but for something like this, we may be interested in allowing no more than an 8-bedroom inn in these areas, but if it were that, you can't have it any higher than X number of feet, you can't have any more than X number of parking spaces, but realize whatever you put in place, you could say, these would be for properties on the east side of US 1, these would be for the properties on the west side of US 1. So you could add some of those conditions in play. It would then allow you to then keep the existing zoning, but it would put some things in place, but it has to become a win-win. The town has to believe they're gaining the win. Are you gaining tourism? Are you gaining economic development the way you want it? But then for the property owners in that area, they have to feel like they're gaining something that they would actually do it. Otherwise, that development may never ever occur. What do we gain? They don't have to go through a rezoning. The town now has a new toolbox in place that governs and guides that whole area. And if they don't do that, they are subject to code enforcement regulations, unlike just a typical commercial zoning district where they can really do a lot more intense uses in a particular area like that.
So, let's say Yellow Dog was to do this. What would you say doesn't have to go to the state level since it'll be a new tool that's implemented?
Correct.
What would the process be as far as would they come in front of P&Z and then it would be presented to council and then there would be a town meeting vote on it? Or what would the process be?
So let's talk about generalities. Anytime you amend your zoning ordinance, what do you have to do? You have to create an ordinance amendment. That zoning ordinance amendment is a text amendment. That text amendment goes before your planning and zoning board, and then it goes before your city council. Once adopted by your city council through the public hearing process, it goes into effect. The language inside a zoning overlay could say, here's our purpose, here's what we're allowing, and here's a process. So it could add additional process. So for example, it could require that everything within inside that has to provide a site plan that includes these following things that your normal site plan process doesn't include. It could require that it actually have a public hearing in front of the council and in front of the planning and zoning. You could add additional things to that your current ordinance doesn't require if somebody wants to just go over. If you have a residential piece of property, and you have that residential piece of property, and you put a single-family home on it, do you have to go through a site plan? No. Why? It's a permitted use. So if it's a permitted use, you don't have to go through that process. In an overlay, though, you could, as an extra tool to protect your community, say you're going to want it to go through some type of a process because it becomes your check and balance. So it keeps things in place and allows your residents a level of satisfaction that there was an extra review put into that they would not have normally ever received.
Okay.
But I need to grab this
Oh, I'm
behind
sorry.
grabbing it.
I've got a lot of problems with this. For one thing, a lot of work has gone into the zoning as we have it now, and then the changes we've made, there'll be a lot of work. Go back to the planning and zoning board through the last 3 chairmen of that. And that period of time, the amount of work. And then recently, when we were going through the update of our comprehensive land use plan and all of the confusion, the arguments, the noise, if you will to call it, throughout the town and the community, because people didn't understand. And it looks to me like the overlay is using a hammer to do what a screwdriver can do. To use your toolbox analogy. You got a screw, you want it in, you hit it with a hammer. No, let's maintain the zoning that allows, let me finish.
You don't hit?
Let me finish. And don't make fun of what I'm saying, and I will make it fun of what you're saying.
Dick, you understand. You understand.
No, I do understand. I do understand that you're corrupting our whole zoning process here. The overlay thing is a way to confuse the people in the town and to just corrupt the zoning plan that we already have in place without going through due process. I would oppose any kind of an overlay as you have presented it here.
Okay, good. Yes.
I'll refer back to what I read that Sebastian did, and Dick, you're my friend, but I kind of disagree here. I think that what it does is it takes an area, and I know we're using the yellow dog because that is an example of what could happen here. But the problem we have with Peeves Electric is they were trying to change zoning to their purpose, okay? And what I read here is we can take an area and lay out multi-purpose with restrictions per purpose, and then a potential developer or landowner, whether it be residents or commercial, goes in knowing what they can do.
Correct.
And granted, you could have a public hearing to let people know what you were doing, but we've already set the rules, and we have a much stronger legal back to force those into enforcement.
You do.
Okay, and that's the way I see it. And I'm not sure that it causes that much more work on our P&Z. It does require some more thought as to what we actually desire to happen in some of these areas.
Which is exciting. It's always exciting.
It is, and not to get into any specifics, I guess I have to here, but Yellow Dog Cafe is a pretty high standard business that we're proud to have in our town. And what they're trying to do here, I think they would carry the same standards to. But what we need to do as a town is figure, what can we allow, and how do we keep this from going crazy?
Yes.
That we don't wind up like Melbourne or Grant Valkyria, where you can't even see the river and this and that. We've got a very narrow piece of property here on the east side of Highway 1. I have a hard time believing that too much could happen, but we would have to lay it out to start so that that is prevented from ever happening.
And the nice thing again is we're starting small. We're picking a small area. It doesn't have to be here. It could be any part of your town. But you're picking an area that you believe has the greatest potential for redevelopment or development or change to occur that maybe has some uncertainty, and you're thinking this may provide us with an opportunity to better control, better regulate, and better help enhance that process towards whatever those previously stated goals were. Wherever you feel you were already trying to go, this kind of can help accelerate that and help you in that aspect. I want to grab Brian because he's been waiting.
Palm Bay recently did a redevelopment district on up on US 1 where Palm Bay Road meets.
Yep.
Is that a similar overlay that what they did, similar to that?
So, good question. Let's talk about redevelopment districts then for just a minute, because this is an important consideration. Sometimes people ask about this. What you have again with a redevelopment district, we're going to use this table again as our concept. You can have commercial, residential, industrial. You can put over the top of that a redevelopment district. That is a state tool, again, state authorized, just as overlays are a state authorized tool, but it actually becomes what? It becomes its own taxing entity. So if you actually create a redevelopment agency and a redevelopment district, you have to have both in place, that redevelopment district takes whatever that base tax value is. So we're going to take the chief's property and where they're located and all those things around his site, all that value, and then as it redevelops or as it develops, usually it's supposed to be for redevelopment, so they'll take historic districts in particular, as it redevelops, any of that incremental change, here's the base, here's what you were already collecting in taxes, whatever that change is in value, if it increases, that difference goes into the redevelopment agency's coffers. And that money can only be spent in that district and only for their stated purposes. So if they want brick pavers, if they want decorative street lights, if they want historic signs, if they want to have a certain thing and they want to enhance something, Brian's like, well, hey, my business, I'd like to do something, I don't have the money to paint it. Hey, redevelopment district, we agreed that if we had this section, we would repaint all the buildings in that area. We collected the cash for it. As long as we're not just doing one business, we're willing to do all those. They could provide paint for that area. So the redevelopment district is an actual district that collects and captures tax money. This has nothing to do with taxes. This is only zoning. It has nothing to do with financial elements. Yes?
Yeah, I think an important point to make sure everybody knows, we're not proposing, or you're not proposing this new procedure. This is something that's been available for us to use for many years now.
Yes.
I mean, I personally just found out about it a few months ago. A lot of people are hearing about it for the first time tonight, but you know, we're not putting a new process in place. The other key point is if we chose to consider an overlay, you know, one of the things we have to make sure is it's consistent with our land use plan. It's not, you know, it's not a tool to change zoning. It's a tool to further refine or further define.
Just, I realize some of us know each other a little bit, and some of you don't know like my background and my history, but I was a city manager in 3 different cities. I've also written 17 zoning ordinances and 9 comp plans. So I've been a part of that process. I was the chairman of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. I was also the chairman of the statewide FRCA, which is the Florida Regional Planning Councils. So as having been the chair of that, and having been the chair of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, and having been the section chair for the American Planning Association in Florida from In River County South, I've been around to see a lot of it. I may look young, and I am still young, but I've had some cool experiences and some neat opportunities to see some things. And then I've also had a political side where I actually was an elected official, having been a county commissioner. And so I served 8 years as a commissioner. So I kind of have all those backgrounds to be able to look at this from a lot of different angles, from a resident standpoint, from a professional standpoint, from a political standpoint, and to maybe help guide you in that sense. I am not here, trust me, to give you something that I wouldn't want, but I don't really care in the sense of it has to be right for you. Don't care about me. If this is something that works for you, if it works for administration, if it works for your council, if it seems like it has a benefit, if you want to add it as a concept, great. If you don't, nobody's going to really lose in that sense as much as it is. It just was it's a concept that most communities around of a larger size found beneficial, and smaller communities are saying, wow, why did we never get on board with it until they hear these things?
Debbie was next. Debbie?
Oh, I just wanted to,
She needs to wave.
no, but I wanted to remind everybody that, you know, it's taken a long time for us to get this comp plan amendment. We have been working on it for a decade, but it's supposed to be a living, growing document that we work on continually. Every 7 years, we're supposed to report to the state. It's either working for us or we need to change it. So in year 6, we send a letter saying it's not quite working, we're gonna work on these couple of things and we'll send you an amendment next year. So every 7 years, they expect this. First time I started here, it hadn't been updated in 18 years. Okay, and this is only the second time, and I've been here 25 years, that we've updated it. So it looks like it's been a struggle that you guys have worked on for all this time, and we finally got it done, so let's put it behind us. That's not it. In 7 years, we're gonna be doing this again. So we should always be looking at our future land use and how we want our comp plan to grow with the community. So,
I think it's a useful tool. Conceptually, I like it. The particulars now would sway me one way or the other, but the town can use it as a tool to fix or to enhance some areas. If they want to either fix it or broke, or they want to enhance to encourage that area to grow, and I like it.
Well, which is why what I would say is, if this is something that appears as though it has the potential to grow legs, then what you would do is, in looking at the city of West Melbourne, what I would encourage you is to spend a little bit of time on your own. If you have the opportunity, resources to pull up your computer, you can do a search, and if you have a pen with you just to write on your paper, if you'll go to MuniCode, have you heard of MuniCode? MUNICODE. MuniCode is the municipal code for almost every single city in the entire U.S.
including Malabar.
Including Malabar. And so if you'll go to MuniCode, they have what's called library. You click on library. It pulls up the state names. You click on Florida, and then you can, by alphabet, begin to go through each one of those. And let me do this together here. Let's do this together. So you're going to see how easy this tool is. So I'm going to type in MuniCode, pulls up. Here's their official site. As I click on the official site, see how fast. Up here on the top left, I'll let this load. It says library. I click on the library, and as library pulls up, here's your map. So I'm just going to click on Florida. And then as I click on Florida, you can see all the different states are here. So let's go to West Melbourne, since that was discussed here. As we look over at West Melbourne, I click on it. And as it pulls up, let me close this out. What you're going to see, and I want to note, is up here it says search. You can type in a search for overlays, and it'll pull up all the instances where overlays show up inside their community. On the left, this is the city's code. So this is not only the charter, but as you go down to see how it deals with, adult entertainment, alcoholic beverages, animals, all those elements. And if I keep coming down, I hit land development regulations. So under the subpart B, or land development, they have their general provisions, and we can begin to see this. So under that, as I look, it begins to talk about, again, purpose and intent, and we do it. So if we type in overlay, it now shows us the establishment and jurisdiction of overlay districts, section 98. It goes through all those. Here are their overlay and special districts. And when I pull it up, this is such an easy to use tool for anybody. It brings up those establishments. And I want to scroll down because their first part doesn't relate to what we're talking about. So we want to get past planned commercial, industrial, interchange. So here's the interchange commercial overlay district. They say, in addition to the conventional zoning districts established, the following overlay is hereby created. And they named it. They came up with a name. Second thing was the purpose and intent. The purpose is to establish commercial areas within the city limits to provide what? Opportunity for new development and major renovation which are aesthetically pleasing, sensitive to existing development, fiscally beneficial to the city, and characterized with ease of access to the highway system. That was their intent. Kept all the existing zoning. So you're like, okay, well that sounds good, but then what are we going to do? Well, here's the area. Their area is defined as a 1 mile radius. Can anyone see, by the way? Is it big enough? Okay. 1 mile radius around there. And then what are their underlying zoning districts? Here they are. What are the permitted uses? All uses by right, shall be identical to those already in the underlying districts, okay? Including drive-through restaurants. So they didn't add anything. Prohibited. All uses prohibited are also prohibited. And so it says, and the following uses will also be. So they added 3 new things that the commercial districts allowed that they didn't want to see any more of. They don't want to see truck shops, body shops, and fireworks retail sales. So that was why the purpose of their overlay looks like they said, hey, we don't want to have those big massive firework distributors. We're allowing them in our district without, they know, and maybe I want to make this comment. You realize you are not legally able to deny a use of land inside your community. You legally, if challenged, have to allow for every use under the sun within your community, within reason. And you say, well, what do you mean? Can you regulate and stop a strip club from coming into your community?
Yes. By the zoning district.
By the zoning.
You can't prohibit it from coming, but you can regulate it.
Right.
So we can't stop a strip club from coming to Malabar, but we can sure regulate the heck out of it so that if it ever finds a spot, there is such a narrow spot, the only place they can go is directly behind the fire station. No, okay, gee. But you have to provide for places, and as a result, the town's ordinance just related to adult uses is so massive. It defines body parts, it gets into all these things, and you had to add 8 or 9 pages to your ordinance just to deal with that one use alone, because we have to allow for uses. But here they figured, listen, we've already allowed for fireworks in our general district, but by this area we'll put this overlay, we're going to control that. But then they get into design requirements. Look at this, architecture, they put in, renderings will be submitted along with site plans to assist in things. They talked about windows, roof lines, relief, some of the relief, which are the different features of the building, signs, buffers. They went into a bunch of things. They talk about lot and structure requirements. They added a lot of things to that when you begin, and I'm not going to go through each of these, but I'll hit the major topics. Signs. So now they talk about things on the signs and what they're allowing. Then as you go down lower, they're talking about landscaping. They want to add some additional landscaping to that area. As you go down further, parking. They talk about some things to say, hey, listen, if you're going to do this, we want to talk about that. And then the next portion is mixed-use overlay district. It now goes into the next district. It's going to have its own purpose, its own definitions, its own architecture. So each district had something different. It doesn't have to be as extensive as that. It can be small, it can be narrow, but you're seeing the basics. Here's what's allowed, here's what isn't allowed, here's what we would like to do. If you can think of an area that, listen, maybe the overlay preserve and the area up by Yellow Dog, you know what? If they're talking about something that you think has some merit, you think you may like that, but you'd also like to see some things on the west side of the road, you have a little Malabar sign that doesn't even have so much as one flower around it, one landscape, shrub. I mean, there's nothing there. Let's show the pride. So, boy, when you come in, you are not going to give us what we see in Palm Bay, but what you are going to see is a community that cares about what we are, and here's our vernacular. This is the look that we have, and we're going to have some things taking place that promote tourism and promote jobs. But it's on our terms, on our scale, on our size. Brian, you had a question.
Yeah, I just noticed at the very beginning of that, when you started reading that the B was to,
The purpose?
The purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, it's intended to provide additional regulations and allowances. That's
Yes.
the aspect of it I like.
That's the overlay, it's additional.
Well, the town will create regulations and
Wait,
allowances.
just a minute.
And the town will create its own overlays criteria, correct?
Correct, it's only yours. This isn't the state telling you what to do, this is you all, 100% designing everything about this. Every word is yours.
PUDs are not new in Malabar. Brook Hollow is a PUD.
Right.
And Brook Hollow would have been successful had the builder not bailed out on the owner and left 2 and 3 undone. Brings up my next question. Can you get a developer that comes in, wants to do a PUD or an overlay? Can you make him post a performance bond that he will see this through to completion?
You can, and that doesn't have to be a part of your zoning process. That can be standalone. So every year, the mayor and the council, they adopt fees as an ordinance. And so those fees are, this is what we're charging for building permits, this is what we're charging, So you can actually set a performance bond that can be a part of any development, not just PUDs, but you can establish that.
Right. I think this is a great tool to have in your toolbox. The light industrial concept,
Babcock and 95, down there, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do a light industrial PUD that you can get somebody to come in, they erase all the lines. It's a win-win for Malabar. All the traffic goes to Palm Bay and Babcock. And without something like this in place, we're not going to be able to do it.
Well, and that's where, again, I think as you start looking at your community and thinking about areas of concern, when you think about what people consider to be the town, and you think about what areas you would like to look at, I think you can kind of begin to get a feel as you start thinking about the hospital and start heading east on Malabar Road. How is that area going to begin to look? What should it look like? Could an overlay address some things where you keep underlying zoning in certain areas but add some type of an enhancement? And what I would say, you say, so what would next steps be from this? Today we're not voting. We're not talking about trying to get you to vote in either way. This was more of an informative meeting. I'm trying to be sensitive to your work schedule, your work time, and so we wanted to do that. But we wanted to say, you have an opportunity. You have people that are knocking on the door saying, hey, what if I did this? What if I did that? People are going to always do that. Their time may not be your time. But you do have an opportunity at this point to look at some things in manageable pieces, to either pick 1, 2, 3, or 0 areas of your community to put in overlay district. Malabar picked 3, or West Melbourne picked 3, and so they were able to put those in place. You may not want any, or you may want 15, because you may find it's your next best tool and use it in ways that they aren't. Because they have so many zoning districts. In fact, have you seen their zoning map? I have it right here. So, I mean, you look at the West Melbourne zoning map, and so when you think about their zoning map compared to yours, let's just look over here at the districts. I mean, look at how many districts you're dealing with, and it just adds for a lot of things going on. So that's a lot to keep up with. So they probably could have used the overlay tool rather than having, I mean, it looks like a hopscotch. So let's talk about spot zoning. I mean, look at all the pieces and the different colors and how it just keeps changing all over the place. And so there are some things. Here you can see where they use that as some continuity. But, you know, here you got a little piece of red here, but then you come way over here, now you've hit red. So that's, you know, or what about the yellow? Wait a minute, how in the world did you put single family way over here, surrounded by, what was that? That almost has an industrial. That would be, it is, well, that's institutional. So it's institutional. So again, institutional surrounded by this. And you can also see how their boundaries are. They've defined their boundaries in an interesting way. This is a county out pocket. So this is in the county, and for these people, they may never, ever go into the city of West Melbourne, but they're now completely surrounded all the way around, and they're a county out part.
But West Melbourne implemented this through a new ordinance.
Yeah, they had a new ordinance, and then it's just begun to change. They've changed theirs quite a few times as well, and almost every community will do that. What Debbie mentioned sending to the state was your comp plan. That was what was getting sent to the state. The zoning ordinance isn't being reviewed by them.
No, I'm just saying, if an individual walks in,
Yes.
you know, a restaurant, you know, they don't propose ordinance changes. They say, I want to rezone, or I want to, you know, but the town would percolate up an overlay. We think this makes sense, like Bob Wilbur just said, in the industrial area, and an overlay would help us make that area come alive.
So this is a good question. So from a philosophical standpoint, there may be times where you would never consider something unless somebody from the development community asks for something. So that may be the case.
Spark the interest.
They could spark the interest for that. And what I would say is, in this particular case, what we really should make very clear is, let's say you decided to pick an area by Yellow Dog, for example, as an overlay. Yellow Dog is not the applicant for this overlay. Yellow Dog is not paying for this ordinance change. This has to be something where, if a community wants a redevelopment area, they know they're going to spend money in putting in brick pavers, and they're going to spend their resources doing something to improve because it's going along with a goal, an objective, a stated purpose for their community. So if you decided to add an overlay for that area, we're not really talking much cost at all. I mean, a couple $1,000 you're developing, you're modifying your ordinance. But that needs to be something that this is a town cost that we're doing. Now, inside the overlay, you could always do something where you do a recapture. You could say, you know, site plan applications within that area are gonna be X dollars. You know, you always have those things that you can do.
Raise the fee. and so-
Raise the fee in an area like that, because maybe you had to spend extra resources, you had to take some political heat initially till people understood that, so you felt that that was worthwhile. But realistically, if you did something, this is going to be you doing it, because you believe it's in your best interest, because you never want to feel like you were being shuffled money. Hey, you know, they paid for the whole thing, so we have to do it. No. You control it, you spend the money, you do it, in the end, it's yours completely. You change it, it's all up to you. Yes.
You keep referring to Yellow Dog
Sure.
as a place where we all know where it is, or are you referring to their desire to add a residential facility adjacent to them to the south?
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question.
Stuart and Nancy would like to build a hotel adjacent to them on the south side of their
Yes.
facility. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes, that's why I don't mean the restaurants. I meant, yes, they were looking, there was a concept to have them put a small inn next to them. So if that was something that you all wanted to do, you could do an overlay, but it wouldn't just be for them. It would perhaps extend a little further down,
Keep it from
and
going nuts.
it could be on the west side of the property. You could have a dual, and you could, so for example, you could say we want to encourage, let's say, tourism and economic development in these particular areas. Maybe we want restaurants. I'm going to call it festive retail. You know, when you go to Hiram's and you go in, and it kind of has this kind of a beachy feel, like it's festive retail. It's not just typical Walmart retail. It's festive. It kind of feels like there's an atmosphere. There's something quaint. Yes, quite. Or, you know, if you look at even the strip going into Vero, as you go into Vero, some of those, each of those little homes that have all been converted, they kind of feel neat. They feel like, oh, I would like to walk, because I'm looking at the architecture. It kind of has a feel. So maybe you'd say restaurants and festive retail, and maybe small inns. You're going to say something that's small. So it's not a hotel. It's going to be something that's going to be manageable, small. So maybe those are going to be 3 new uses you would allow in that overlay, but you're also going to add some aesthetic considerations. Maybe you're going to talk about the setback to say, you know, realistically, we're concerned about nobody can do it unless they have X feet of width in the east side, east of US 1. They'd have to have a minimum. So that way you're not worrying about somebody taking a 20-foot sliver and saying, hey, I can do it. I'd say, no, you can't. Why? I don't have, if you can mentally follow me, if you have a driveway that goes into a parking lot, that drive aisle has to be a minimum width. So if it's a one-way, it's usually a minimum of 15 feet of width. That parking space next to it, if it's angled parking spaces, it has to be 15. If it's a perpendicular parking space, it's going to be 18 to 20. So now we had 15 plus 20, so we're already at 25 just to do that. And we all know the state isn't going to allow you to put that right on US 1, so there's already the state setback. So maybe you're talking, again, if anybody's doing anything, they have to have the ability for parking in a nominal sense. They would have to have a minimum width. So realistically, I think you're looking at how the west side would perhaps look and whether we could be encouraging some things and say, you know, we want to promote some flexibility and this is why we want to do it.
And Sebastian, they had a thing where, like, if you had a sidewalk in front of your house or business with this much green, you had no setback at all. Well, you already had a setback, it was just in the form of a sidewalk. If you didn't have to provide a sidewalk or something, then there was a 30-foot setback, you know.
And so from a procedure standpoint, after this meeting ends, and if there seemed to be at least a general consensus that we like the idea of this, then you could set another meeting to say, let's workshop an area. Let's pick an area. So whether it be something on Malabar Road or whether it be something on the north end of the community. And then from that, you could say, can we do, I'm going to call it a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Can we do kind of an analysis, say, what would be the purpose of this district? Can we kind of agree, generally speaking, it would be for this purpose? What would be some permitted uses we would want to see? What would be some prohibited uses we would want to see? And we would sort of show this is what's allowed here now. Here's what you can see is allowed. And then from that, are there any other things we'd want to add? Some aesthetic, some parking, some signs, some certain considerations. And if that were the case, can we at least generally agree on that? Then we would go back to the drafting board, work with Matt and work with Debbie, and Deneen, we would come up with something as just a draft concept, pitch it back to everybody and say, does this seem like we've outlined the right area, first off? Did we create the right purpose? Did we add the right kind of things? Does it seem like we're going that right direction? But in a SWOT analysis, basically what you're doing is you're letting the community decide geographically. We could talk about these concepts. What do we think about everybody talking about the north end? No, they didn't like that. What about Malheur? Oh, we like that. And through that, you could even give people little color circles, and they just put it on a map. And go, yeah, everybody kind of has an equal conceptual vote. We're not voting, but it's for a group's sake. Yeah, we kind of all like this, and you begin to work through them. These are concepts. So, Mayor,
Yeah, the only thing is, the hardest part about this, you gotta be a planning visionary. You know, how, I don't know anybody in the town that would kind of thinks, like a visionary. That's the only way you can do this.
You do. So let me be really clear then. This meeting is not for Yellow Dog, but if I were looking at an opportunity right now, and the reason I would want to look at an overlay is because you do have a request from Yellow Dog saying, hey, would you guys look at anything? I told them they can do whatever they want. They can go through a rezoning request, and they can go through that whole process, just as Pease did it, and they can look to see what
Well, I'm
was.
just thinking, for the whole town, it
But
would be
for
very
this,
hard.
yeah, you could do a small overlay just for that area, and say, let's start with a manageable piece. If we don't like this, if it doesn't work, we're not going to have another one of these that we're going to do again. But just for that area, can we at least conceptually do a workshop and define these things? If we can't seem to agree and it doesn't seem to work putting together language, then you know where things go.
I like Bob's idea about that industrial to our south.
Well, we tried, Fountainhead. We've been talking about it.
You generally, though speaking, should know whether or not you have somebody that's actively looking at going to an area that would be interested in grabbing it. Otherwise, it may be a tool that's just going to sit on the toolbox, sit on the shelf for a while. I don't want to do something where we're sitting 20 years later, well, that didn't really work. Well, we never had anybody that was even talking about doing something that noted a concern or problem or an issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's wrap it up.
I have a question on West Melbourne zoning. They
Okay.
had the interchange, the very last one on their zoning, if you move over to the,
Okay.
slide that over to the left a little bit. Gateway Interchange District.
Okay.
Now, was that around before the overlay was, or is that a result of the overlay?
Yes.
I'm not as familiar with West Melbourne's.
Yeah, but that's what I'm
History
saying.
and
That-
timeline, yeah.
that- The overlay was for the interchange, now we have at the bottom of the.
Right, if you look up here at the top, they actually have their interchange commercial overlay.
Okay.
That's written, which is different than the actual zoning district, which is the
Gotcha.
Gateway Interchange District.
Gotcha.
So they already have the Gateway District, and then they came along and actually added the interchange
Okay,
commercial.
so they did the overlay over their original concept.
Correct.
To provide more regulation.
Correct. Yes.
Question, as far as, let's say if we did try to do this with Yellow Dog,
Okay.
can we put the specs out there as to how much revenue comes back from the Yellow Dog? And okay, this overlay, this is what happened, this is what changed their business. Okay, they went from X dollars to here, this is what you could do for your business, and kind of have other people, any other businesses looking that, hey, listen, this can be done, and this is what was brought to the forefront, and this actually goes back into the town of Malabar.
How does the town win?
Citizens.
Yeah.
Sure.
What's
So-
in it for us?
So I think in any process, you're always looking at what your litmus test is. So for this, you would have a period of time that you would begin to look to see what is actually going on. Now, through the county, anything that's a hotel has to be registered, and they have to go through, and they have to show sales and receipts, and they have to go through that process. So you would have that data. You don't really have it for a restaurant unless they've shared that data with you, and you look to see whether it's enhanced things for that area or not. But I think as a rule, you generally want to look to see, did that area aesthetically begin to improve? Did that area begin to appreciate in terms of what the taxable value was through sales? The actual appraised value on commercial property, it's going to try and keep pace with whatever the market is. If it's residential and it's homesteaded, it's staying where it is except for that small incremental change each year. But that commercial value, it's going to be going up and down, whatever's happening. So you should begin to see some things within a period of time to know whether that's been a tool. And what I'd say is, you know what? If you look at some places, what did the city of Port St. Lucie, they contributed $44 million to bring Torrey Pines to the city of Port St. Lucie. The state of Florida, along with Palm Beach County, they went and spent $670 million of our money to bring in the Scripps Research Institute for 1,000 jobs. $670 million is what they tried to look at. You look at what was going on, with the Burnham Institute, all these different things that people try and do to promote economic development. Here, we're talking about something that may cost you a couple $1,000s, that may be Malabar's way. This is our way. You know what? We don't have big economic incentives, but what we can do is put a tool in our toolbox that may allow for some things that seems like it's right because it's near an area that already has some development, and if that's the case, great. But if it doesn't really work, and we've checked the litmus test, maybe it remains in the toolbox, but we may never expand it and do that. Yes.
Yeah, I think you glossed over one very important point. The return to the town is if we do an overlay district, it encourages development, property values go up, assessed value go up, Malabar tax revenue goes up. That's the return to Malabar. As well as jobs.
Yes.
That brings up the point of looking at overlay districts. Do we rank them and rate them on economic contribution to the town, traffic relief, aesthetics in the travel community? I mean, we need to apply all of these different things to it and look at where Malabar is going to get the most clout for
What benefit are we going to
Yeah. Kevin, Dick?
I want to be sure, going back to what I said a while ago, does the overlay actually change anything? Or does it open up a door to saying, hey, this might work there? Which is what? What is the truth here? Because the people of Malabar are going to assume if we create an overlay that we're changing all the zoning.
Right.
Are we?
You're not. That's why I think from a public standard.
In one
I know.
sense, it's like, okay, the town of Malabar has a bunch of tools that are old, they're getting old now, so now the town of Malabar needs to get new tools in their toolbox, so we can stay progressively rich with
But we have to be
everybody else.
very careful
But
what we do,
still keep our
so
preamble.
not to confuse the citizenship.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Mayor, it's your meeting.
Right. So, I thank you all for coming, and we try to keep this for an hour, so. So we got an introduction tonight, or today, and so just think about it, do some research. I'm gonna go check out the West Melbourne interchange, and, I'll talk to Hal Rush,
Sebastian
the
as
mayor,
well.
and find out.
Sebastian has, in fact, say a lot of the cities that I looked at, even in Brevard, a lot of them have implemented overlays. So you're going to see that it's definitely become a very widely used tool. Indian River, Brevard, so you'll find some good resources. Muni Code, again, is a good source just for you to look at a lot of different things. And it's so easy. You saw how easy it was for me to scroll and look and look at that.
So everybody do homework, so P and Z and county. All right, without objection.
That's a good idea. A lot of people fear.
Something new.